All right, let's dive right into this explainer of the legendary 1950 Brinks robbery. We're heading back in time to a freezing January evening in Boston, where a crew of guys pulled off a heist so flawlessly executed it literally baffled the FBI for years. It seemed like the absolute pinnacle of criminal organization.
To really grasp the massive stakes here, we have to look at the total loot. On January 17th, these thieves walked away with over $1.2 million in cash, plus another $1.5 million in checks and securities. That grand total, roughly $2.7 million, made it the largest robbery in U.S. history at the time. It was an absolutely astronomical figure that sent shockwaves all the way to Washington.
The public and the press went wild. They immediately branded this a masterclass in criminality, dubbing it the crime of the century. And honestly, the way they pulled it off almost made that true. They hit the Brinks security firm like ghosts, leaving law enforcement completely scratching their heads and the whole country absolutely enthralled by the mystery.
Part 1. The perfect crime and its flawless execution. Let's look at exactly how this gang ambushed the Boston Brinks employees on that January night with terrifying precision.
You know, what's truly bizarre but incredibly meticulous is the mix of disguises they used to make sure they left zero fingerprints and barely made a sound. Picture this. 5 to 7 men breached the second floor right before 7:30 p.m. They're wearing Navy-style peacoats, gloves, and chauffeur's caps. But to hide their faces, they wore these cheap Halloween-style Captain Marvel masks. And to muffle their footsteps, one guy wore crepe-soled shoes while the rest wore rubber galoshes. In total silence, they bound and gagged 5 employees, loaded up the cash, and boom, they were gone in a flash.
Their mathematical precision really shows when you track their movements. Over a year before the heist, in December 1948, they started casing the building from neighboring rooftops, using binoculars to track lights and employee schedules. By the fall of 1949, they were literally sneaking inside the building after hours. They removed 5 different door locks, took them to a local keymaker who stayed open late, made copies, and put the original locks back before sunrise. They even stole a brand new 1949 Ford truck in November just for the getaway. When the day finally came, the actual robbery took them just 20 minutes.
Part 2. Hundreds of dead ends and years of empty tips. Because even after that perfect getaway, the FBI hit a massive brick wall. For 6 long years, the robbers were entirely free, while investigators chased absolutely empty tips. People sent in the wildest theories. One citizen out in California seriously suggested the entire haul was just dumped into the Atlantic Ocean. Agents chased rumors about modest men in New Jersey suddenly blowing massive sums of cash at nightclubs. They even interviewed old Prohibition-era bootlegging gangs. Literally hundreds of New England racketeers were questioned, and nothing stuck.
And look, even when they did find physical evidence scattered around Massachusetts, it frustratingly led to exactly 0 immediate arrests. They found a chauffeur's cap and some tape at the scene. A few weeks later, some kids playing near the Mystic River stumbled upon rusting revolvers belonging to the Brinks guards. And in March, pieces of that stolen green Ford getaway truck turned up at a dump in Stunkton. The gang had taken an acetylene torch to it, smashed the motor with a sledgehammer, and hid the pieces in fiber bags used for beef bones. They only left them above ground because the earth was frozen solid. But despite all this physical evidence, the trail just kept going completely cold.
Part 3. The gang turns. Because what the FBI couldn't solve with physical evidence, the gang's own internal paranoia would soon destroy from the inside out.
It's a classic clash between the mastermind and the muscle. On one side, you've got Anthony Pino, the alleged mastermind, outliving free in Boston and spending huge sums on lawyers to fight his deportation to Italy. On the other side, you have the muscle, Joseph Specs O'Keefe. Specs got arrested for a totally separate burglary and is stewing away in a Pennsylvania jail cell. He desperately needs money for his own legal defense, and he is absolutely furious that the crew back in Boston won't hand over his full cut of the Brinks loot. So he starts firing off bitter, threatening letters from prison.
Part 4. The ultimate betrayal. This boiling tension brings us right to the point where the gang decides Specs O'Keefe is just way too dangerous to keep around.
This paranoia exploded into a crazy, violent summer. When O'Keefe gets out on bond in 1954 and heads back to Boston demanding his cash, the gang orchestrates 3 wildly violent, yet somehow unsuccessful, assassination attempts against him in a single month. On June 5th, a drive-by shooter shatters his car windshield. On June 14th, he gets into a literal street shootout in Dorchester with his own crew member, Henry Baker. 2 days after that, they hire a notorious hitman named Elmer Trigger Burke, who ambushes O'Keefe and fires 30 machine gun rounds at him, wounding him in the wrist and chest. Miraculously, O'Keefe survives the machine gun fire, but he ends up back in jail on a probation violation. And that is his breaking point. Realizing he's staring down years in prison while his so-called friends are actively trying to murder him, he flips. On January 6, 1956, he sits down with 2 FBI agents and utters the words that doomed the whole crew. All right, what do you want to know?
Part 5. The final verdict. That 11th hour confession blew the whole thing wide open just days before the statute of limitations was set to expire. O'Keefe spilled it all. He gave up the keys, the truck, and the precise roles of every single guy. Armed with that, the FBI moved fast. 6 core members were arrested on January 12th. Another guy, Stanley Gusciora, actually died in custody of a brain tumor. 2 members, Faraday and Richardson, managed to go on the run, but the FBI tracked them to a Dorchester apartment a few months later, busting in right as the guys lunged for loaded revolvers.
Okay, so the gang is finally behind bars. But the biggest mystery of this whole explainer is still hanging out there. What on earth happened to the millions in stolen cash? Well, in a completely bizarre twist that summer, the money actually started to surface. Down in Baltimore, an arcade operator noticed a guy passing a really musty, worn-out $10 bill. Police swooped in, arrested the guy, who happened to be a Boston hoodlum, and the FBI matched the serial numbers to the Brinks loot. Under questioning, he points the finger at another Boston criminal known as Fat John. So agents raid Fat John's Tremont Street office, rip open a newly built wall partition, and find a literal picnic cooler wrapped in plastic and old Boston newspapers. Inside, over $51,000 of moldy, rotting Brinks cash. You can't make this stuff up.
But here is the real shocker. The vast majority of that cash was never recovered. The FBI figured a lot of it had been buried in dirt and ashes before being moved, which just caused it to rot away. Between the Baltimore arrest and Fat John's cooler, authorities only got back around $58,000. Over $1.15 million just vanished into thin air, completely unaccounted for to this very day.
Ultimately, it was O'Keefe's explosive testimony, combined with years of grueling FBI legwork, that secured life sentences for the 8 surviving gang members in October of 1956.
Which leaves us with a really fascinating question to wrap up this explainer. Think about it. No matter how flawless the mathematics of a plan might be, copying keys in the dead of night, calculating precise timing, covering every single track, can a perfect crime ever truly survive the fatal flaws of human nature and greed? They beat the system, for sure, but they couldn't beat their own paranoia. Thank you so much for joining me to unpack the brilliant yet totally doomed crime of the century.